Exodus chapter 4. Exodus chapter 4, we see the continued saga of the burning bush. Moses in the presence of Yahweh, in the presence of Jesus. And we've got to remember, it's not just a fire in this bush. It is a person. And Moses can see there is a person in this bush because he hides his face from this being. It's not just a voice out of nowhere. And here's Moses. Remember the story up until this point. Moses, born into ethnic cleansing, should have been killed, but by the providence of God, not only is he not slaughtered, he is now raised in Pharaoh's household so that God can bring down the fall of Pharaoh's dynasty. And as he reaches adulthood, we're told at the age of 40, he takes a massive personal risk, siding with the Hebrews rather than the Egyptians. He commits murder in a misguided attempt to bring about the salvation. We're told in Acts that he thought the people would see that he's the Savior. And the next day he goes out and tries to play peacemaker with a couple of Israelites that are fighting, and they say, "You're going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian? Who made you prince?" And they rejected him. And Moses has to flee to the desert to hide from Pharaoh. And as he flees to the desert, he spends another 40 years in the wilderness, dealing with doubt and discouragement, dealing with that identity crisis. Am I a Hebrew? Am I an Egyptian? I'm a stranger here, but where do I belong? You can hear Moses. If you would talk to Moses, I picture him saying, "This isn't the way it was supposed to go." Right? Can you relate to that in life? This isn't the way I thought it was going to be. It wasn't supposed to work out this way. But the significance of this mountaintop experience with the mini tree, right? We saw that. It's mapping on to Genesis chapter 3, presenting before Moses the same question: will you trust Yahweh's goodness in his revelation to you, or will you seek to go about things in your own way? Will you determine what's good and evil? And he's in a dry place outside of Eden. God reveals himself to Moses in the person of Yahweh. And again, if you go and you read the pivot between God and Yahweh and the angel of Yahweh is all very intentional to show and point to who this being is. He is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who of course Jesus himself in John 8:58 says, "Before Abraham was, I am." Right? Identifying himself as the being in the bush. And so it's Jesus that appears to Moses, and he calls Moses to partner with him in the reclaiming of humanity and to bring about human flourishing, to redeem, to save, to restore Eden. And the sign and the call to Moses is this: go get my people and bring them back here to taste what you have tasted, to experience what you have experienced. Bring my people to worship me. And in a nutshell, that's the call to every believer. The call to go and make disciples is a call to invite God's people to come worship Yahweh. Amen? That's what we do. And Moses responds with two questions. His questions are, who am I to go to Pharaoh? Me, Moses. You remember what happened last time, right? And who am I to go to the elders of Israel? They already rejected me, God. And who are you? When I go to them, who do I say sent me? The two questions, who am I and who are you? And Yahweh answers that by revealing to Moses his name. And it's a name, mind you, that no other person even can utter. We know that later in history the Jews would not speak the word. They would not verbalize it out of apparent reverence for the name. But the name is, I am who I am. It's a first person verb of being. I can't say that. I can say you are who you are, but I can't say I am who I am. The word means I am he who causes all to be, including myself. It speaks of his eternal existence, of his all-powerful sovereignty over the creation, over his transcendence from the creation. I mean, if we began to develop this name, we couldn't exhaust it. In fact, it is this name that will be revealed to us throughout eternity. It is this name, we remember that Samson's father said, "What's your name so that we can thank you when this prophecy comes true?" And Jesus, the angel of Yahweh, says, "Why do you ask my name, seeing you can't understand it?" And that's what we have to understand. We cannot fully understand the identity of God. And so we need to let that tension exist. We endeavor to know him. We seek after knowing him with the knowledge that we will not and cannot exhaust that knowledge. And in those questions, in giving his name, not only does he give an incomprehensible name, but he promises this name is the name of the covenant, meaning I will be with you, Moses. When you go to Pharaoh, I will be with you. When you go to the elders, I will be there, Moses. I promise I will be with you. That's the promise that God makes. And when he does it, we just read it, he promises 100% success guaranteed. He says, you will go to the elders and they will accept you because I'll be with you. And you will go to Pharaoh and he won't listen to you. So I'll punch him in the face and you'll come out and you will plunder the Egyptians as you come out of Egypt. I promise you this, Moses. 100% guarantee. And so Moses is presented with the dilemma, will I trust or will I define good and evil on my own terms? And that's where we left. We don't know what Moses' response is. When I was in 7th grade, I played basketball, and I wasn't very good. And at the end of practice, you have the conditioning. So you have to run these sprints up and down, up and down, up and down. And then the coach was, I don't know if he was mean or if it was good coaching. I don't know what it was, but you had to come and you'd sprint so you're tired, and then you'd have to shoot a basket from far away. And once you made it, you were done. No more exercise. So all the good players were in bad condition because they didn't have to run that much. And all of us bad players were really fit because we kept shooting and we couldn't make it. So in this case, I remember like it was yesterday, I missed the first 2 times I come down the court. And then, other players are starting to make it, so they are out of the drill, and there's just a few of us left. And there's an event that's going to be held in this gymnasium after our practice. So people start to arrive, and they're sitting there with nothing to do except watch us fail. And I missed a few shots, and you're running, and you're getting more and more tired. I was the last person left. And I had to keep running back and forth, shoot, miss, back and forth, shoot, miss, back. Everybody's watching. And it gets in your head, doesn't it? Failure gets in your head to the point where you're no longer even doing what is right to make the shot because of pressure of people watching and being tired. And eventually the coach said, just go make a layup just right in front of the basket. And I did on the first try. But failure gets in your head. So before we're too critical of Moses, let's step back and ask ourselves, how are we dealing with discouragement? How are we dealing with failure? How are we dealing with when the Christian life doesn't go the way that we thought it should go? When we say, God, I set out to obey you and you're not keeping your end of the bargain. And I've known that this text was coming, and I figured that this text would be a big club that I would use to beat everyone to serve God better. Right? I mean, that's Moses. God says, come serve me, and Moses argues with God. And so and I've heard this text preached that way many times. And this week, as I was preparing, I listened to another preacher, actually a guy that I know, that I grew up with. I heard his sermon on this text, and it was so filled with grace. It moved me. Because we'll come to this text and we will beat Moses. Come on, Moses. You're talking to Jesus. You're talking to God in a flaming bush here. Come on, Moses. But yet here we have the very presence of God. How are we doing? And so I want to leave you with grace. I want to leave you with the grace that says Yahweh never leaves his own man in a dry place. He never leaves him alone. He comes to him in the dry place. And secondly, we're going to see in chapter 4, he never discards his own people. Those he saved are his delight, right? He has purchased them with the precious blood of his own Son. He doesn't toss them on the trash heap the first time they failed. He doesn't toss them away when they're struggling in this journey of faith. But he engages Moses. Remember Peter? In Luke chapter 22, the upper room, Peter is so confident. Jesus, I will never leave you. Even if everybody else falls away, Jesus, I'm not going to fall away. And Jesus' response to them is, Satan has demanded permission. Unpack that whole statement. Satan has demanded permission to sift you like wheat. But Peter, I have prayed for you. And when you have returned, strengthen your brothers. I mean, the significance of that statement, Peter, Satan has demanded permission and he's gotten it. And he will sift you like wheat. But I am confident, Peter, because I have prayed for you. And you will be sifted and you will go away, Peter, but you will return because I have prayed for you. And when you have returned, I've got a mission for you. Strengthen your brothers. And we see Moses, having spent 40 years meditating on this failure to save, this rejection by his own people, and the subsequent exile into the wilderness. This failure has become Moses' reality. But it's not God's reality, is it? Our failures are not God's reality. And he says this. God comes and he calls Moses and he says, Moses, you're going to help me. The first two we saw in chapter 3, those are questions. In my humble opinion, I think those are legitimate. I think that was a legitimate response of, God, I don't understand. And we can't presume that Moses had a fully developed doctrine of Yahweh at this stage. He grew up in Pharaoh's palace. Any Yahweh exposure he would have had either would have been from his Egyptian education portraying Yahweh as a false deity or a lesser deity than Pharaoh, or from the Hebrew slaves here and there throughout the palace. But he wouldn't have had a theological education on who Yahweh is. So when Yahweh shows up, we have every indication that yes, he's heard of this being, but he doesn't know this being. And that's what Yahweh's point is. He says, go to the elders of Israel, tell them, I'm the God of Genesis. And I'm going to develop your theology of me through your life story, Moses and the people. But Moses struggles. And here in this chapter, we're going to see 3 objections. But these are no longer questions. These are excuses. You don't see them being asked as a question. And Moses' response when God calls him God says, I guarantee 100% success. They will listen to you, Moses. And Moses says they won't listen. Because he spent 40 years meditating on his failure and the discouragement that comes along with that. But I want to see three things from this text today that ought to give you the greatest encouragement in serving Jesus and in answering the call to follow. Yesterday I saw a YouTube production. It's called Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. Maybe you've seen it. Ravi Zacharias Ministries, there's a man who's working with them, who's a former Muslim and came to Christ as he was seeking to establish his beliefs in Islam. And it took him 3 years. It was over a period of 3 years. He was friends with a believer, and together they were wrestling through and researching what is truth. What is true, the Quran or the Holy Scriptures, the New Testament, the Old Testament? Which one is true? And it took a whole year before he acknowledged that, yes, the New Testament is reliable historically. It took a year just to get to that point. By the end of 3 years, Christ had been calling this young Islamic man to himself. And it was hard because he had been raised, his mother was a third-generation Islamic missionary. And he knew what it would cost him. And he said he arrived at a point where he knew that the gospel was true, and he gave his intellectual assent to the gospel, but it wasn't a regenerative belief yet, because he said to God, I need time to grieve. I need time to mourn the loss of my faith, because I know what that will mean for my family, for my life, for my culture, for everything. And so he went to the Quran to find a comfort. And in that moment, he realized that the Quran doesn't have a single verse to offer comfort to those who are hurting in their service of Allah. And that's when it clicked. That's when he knew the Scripture is true. Because the Scripture offers comfort for us in our failures, in our inability to truly pursue God the way God ought to be pursued. And we've seen the bumpiness of this road of faith. And so I want to offer 3 encouragements to you as we see here in God's interaction with Moses. If you are discouraged, if you are depressed, if you are in despair, if you are struggling in your journey of faith, here's what you need. Number 1, you need a deeper appreciation of God's faithfulness. God's not done with you. God is never done with His own. He who started a good work in you will complete it until the day of Jesus Christ. He never discards His own, so He is not done with you, and you need a deeper appreciation of God's faithfulness. The fact that Yahweh is even having a conversation with Moses in this moment is proof that He is faithful to His own, is it not? Because I don't do that with my kids all the time. Sometimes my kids want to offer lame excuses. Correction, a lot of times my kids want to offer lame excuses. And I usually revert to the standard because I'm dad and I said so. But God is having an actual conversation, an actual interaction with Moses, even answering his questions, promising, I will be with you. And you need to have a deeper appreciation of that. Notice what he says. Moses' response, they're not going to listen. They're not going to believe that Yahweh appeared. So Yahweh says to him, what's in your hand, Moses? Now listen, when God asks you a question, it is full of eternal significance. And this question, what's in your hand, Moses? I mean, it's a pretty easy question, right? A stick, a staff. so much bigger than that. And you're going to see this staff theme develop not just throughout the rest of Moses' life, but throughout the rest of the scriptures. It's very significant. And Yahweh says to him, what is in your hand? But to Moses, it's just a normal thing. He probably had this stick for years. If you've ever had a proper walking stick, I found one time when we were on vacation in the mountains, and it was a perfect height for me, and it had 3 branches that fit just perfectly between these 3 fingers. It was the greatest thing until it broke. Moses had this walking stick, probably for years. You can imagine, as a shepherd, his staff was an indispensable tool. You don't discard them. When you find the one that you want, you keep it. You can picture it with all the bark gone and seasoned with the oils of Moses' hand, 40 years sweating, caring for sheep in the desert, right? It's just a normal thing. Every shepherd's got one. And God says to Moses, what's that in your hand? And he shows that he is not limited only to supernatural things. Because so often we want, some supernatural power to come down and fix all of our problems. And God is saying, I'm not limited to work through the supernatural. I work through just plain ordinary, through the stick, Moses, that you've been carrying likely for years. God works in the common, ordinary things of life. And you need to know that when God calls you, He equips you to what He has called you to do. In fact, He has been equipping you up to this point, even through all the ordinary things of life. The boring times are times of God's training. The bumps in the road, the pandemics that come along that interrupt our whole lives is God's training ground for the mission that He has prepared us to do. Do you believe that? Do you believe that God is calling you? Do you understand that He has prepared you through the everyday matters of life? Because we usually assume that following Jesus is automatically going to mean a radical life change. Now, in one way it does, because you went from following me to following somebody else. So that's a massive change. But even in Moses' life, on the one hand, is going to be a massive change. On the other hand, it's going to be the exact same thing. He was shepherding for 40 years in the wilderness. What's he going to do? Shepherd for 40 years in the wilderness. Now he goes from sheep to people, and trust me, it's much worse. Sheep are so much easier than people. But God has already and is preparing Moses, and it's not going to be this massive radical life change. In fact, for him to go back and talk to Pharaoh, again, not a radical life change. You understand, he was raised as the grandson of Pharaoh. Now, this is a new Pharaoh by this stage, but he is familiar with the court, familiar with the process and the procedure. Who better to do this? And yet Moses doesn't see any of that because of the discouragement and the despair that he has lived under that has become his reality. And God is working to break down that reality and show Moses, there's a new reality, Moses, that you can't even see because you can't get over yourself. You need to appreciate that I am faithful. And God has called us all to participate in His mission. And He's given you a spiritual gift. And usually when we think of spiritual gifts, we think of these miraculous signs and wonder gifts, right? Speaking in tongues and prophesying and healing and those. Most of the spiritual gifts, most of them, there's a few that are miraculous, but most of the spiritual gifts are normal, everyday things. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10 says, he who speaks, speak like you're speaking the word of God. We all speak every day, right? That's a normal thing. Speak like you're speaking the word of God. Those who serve, do it by the ability that God provides. Service, that's a normal, everyday part of life. But do it by God's ability. Our call to serve is mainly accomplished in the ordinary, mundane, everyday realm of life. And he's calling Moses to see this, that I am with you, and that in this I am training you. And he has strategically placed his people. And in the church, he has strategically placed his people to accomplish his work and to lead one another in our worship to Yahweh. Hasn't he? That's what it says in Ephesians chapter 4. And here's where we're told, when you've been strategically placed by God, do what is right in front of you. That's what we're called to do. And if God wants to change your path, He'll change it. But what He has called us to do is do what is right here, right now. And He will even use our own failures, our own sins, our own painful history to accomplish what He could not have accomplished if we didn't have those scars. Paul says that. 2 Corinthians, he says, we even gave up on life, but God afflicts us so that we can comfort those who are also afflicted. So the staff is going to be a powerful thing. And here it's a symbol that God uses the ordinary things of life, including us. Because I know a few of you are extra special, but most of us are pretty normal, right? Well, I don't know if I want to use the word normal. Pretty average. We'll use the word average. That's who God uses. And God delights to use the foolish to shame the wise. And look at the signs. Look at the signs that God gives Moses. He gives him 3 signs. What is that in your hand? A staff, Moses says, verse 3. So he says, throw it on the ground. And he threw it on the ground and it became a serpent. And Moses ran from it. Yeah, that's what you do. Moses ran from it. And Yahweh said, Moses, put out your hand and catch it by the tail. And actually the word that is used here is seize it, grab it firmly, grasp it. And that's what you do when you catch a snake, right? Well, it depends on which videos you watch. Some people like by the tail. I learned as a kid, when you catch a snake, you're supposed to catch it right behind the head, because then it can't bite you. And you're supposed to grab it. But that's hard to do. Even in your mind, you know, I want to grab this snake. But to force your body to do it is... And this is what happens. God says, Moses, grasp it firmly. And the word that it says here, so he put out his hand and caught it. It's like he grabbed it and it was growing in firmness. And that's the story of our life, isn't it? God says obey. And in those moments that we do obey, a lot of times we don't obey strongly. But when you start to obey, you can grow in strength, grow in obedience. And so we take the first step. And God says, Moses, catch this serpent, and it became a staff in his hand again. And in verse 5 it says, that they may believe that Yahweh, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to you. Now, what's the significance here? Again, Yahweh says to him, put your hand inside your cloak. He put his hand inside the cloak, and when he took it out, behold, his hand was leprous like snow. Great parlor trick, right? Whoop, whoop, look at that. It wouldn't be. It wouldn't be, because it was an incurable disease. Now, this leprosy that we're talking about is not Hansen's disease, our modern definition of leprosy, but it would have been any number of skin diseases. But there's something significant about this. When God said, put your hand back inside your cloak, he put it back inside his cloak. When he took it out, it was restored like the rest of his flesh. He says, if they will not believe you, or listen to the first sign, they may believe the latter sign. And if they will not even believe these 2 signs or listen to your voice, you'll take some water from the Nile, pour it on the ground, and the water that you take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground. Now, I had an infection. It's 2020. So at the beginning of 2019, I think I must have picked it up at the gym or something, some kind of fungal infection on my foot. Spare you the details. It was disgusting. To the point where it made my hands break out with an allergic reaction to what was going on in my foot. to the point where I didn't want to touch anything. I didn't want to touch my kids. I didn't want to touch my own face. Because I don't know what's going on here, but I don't want to spread this, right? And God is telling Moses, put it in, take it out, put it in, take it out. It's like, what is going on in there that this is happening? But the point is, remember, we're going to know this from later on. To be unclean, to have leprosy, is to be separated from the presence of God, right? It is seen as a divine curse. Moses' own sister is going to come under the curse of leprosy because of disobedience to Yahweh. So this disease is seen as a curse from God. It's seen as a result of living outside God's presence, right? So what do we have here? We have a serpent. We have a disease that comes from living outside the presence of God. And we have water of the Nile turning to blood. Now, what flowed out of Eden? Do you remember what flowed out of Eden? There was a river that split into four. One of them is the river that encircles Egypt. Now, these are most likely not literal rivers because the flood would have transformed Earth's geography. But what we're talking about is symbolic. And what is symbolic is the river of Egypt, which here is called the Nile. The river of Egypt was both controlled by Pharaoh, was sourced in the gods and brought life. And we see later on in the code that Moses gets from Yahweh that blood equals death, right? Blood, the life is in the blood. And so by pouring out water, which is the source of life, and it becomes blood, it becomes symbolic of death. Do you see what's happening here? These three signs, when God says, go to the people, go to the elders of Israel, what are these signs going to represent? What are these signs going to tell them? They're going to tell them that you're living outside of Eden. The serpent, the disease, the death. And Moses, by the way, you now have power. I'm giving you power over evil, over the serpent. I'm giving you power over disease. I'm giving you power over life and death. This is my mission, to restore Eden. And Moses, these signs, they have great significance beyond the fact that it's just a snake and a stick. Isn't that really cool? You've got to understand God is faithful to His mission. To redeem humanity, to restore Eden, He is faithful. And when you are discouraged, you need to have a deeper appreciation of this faithfulness. Your past does not define you, but it does prepare you. And God is not done with you yet. And you can sit there and say, but you don't understand what I've done. You don't understand what's happened to me. You're right, I don't, but God does. In Moses' case, Moses was a murderer. By the way, this Nabil Qureshi, do you know who this friend was that he was engaging with for 3 years? We found this out after the fact. This friend was David Wood. Some of you know David Wood. I'll send his testimony out. David Wood, before he was a believer, beat his own dad's head in with a hammer. Went to prison. Spoiler alert, accepted Jesus. And turns around and leads this Muslim guy to Christ. You think God is done with you? Not a chance. Not a chance. God is faithful to His own. The second encouragement you need when you're discouraged, when you are looking at the call of God to join Him, to partner with Him, and you're discouraged and you're not sure and you don't know if you can do it or should do it. In that moment, you need a bigger view of God. Look at Moses' second excuse. Verse 10. Moses says to Yahweh, "Oh, my master, I'm not eloquent, either in the past or since you've spoken to your servant, but I'm slow of speech and tongue." He doesn't seem to have a problem talking. I mean, he's not stuttering here. He's bold. I mean, he's hiding his face, yes, but he's bold talking to God, giving all these excuses, right? I am slow. I can't speak very well. And Yahweh says to him, "Who made man's mouth? Who made him mute or deaf or seeing or blind?" Did you hear that? Who made man mute or deaf or seeing or blind? And we see in John chapter 9 where a man is born blind only for the glory of God, lives his whole life blind so that God can show off. And God says that here. He makes this claim. Who's the one that does that, Moses? Is it not I, Yahweh? So go, and what's he promise? Again, the same promise. I will be with your mouth. I'm not just with you, I'm with your mouth, Moses. Notice what he doesn't do. Moses' excuse is very self-centered. Oh, God, woe is me, I'm not good enough. And notice that God doesn't come and say, oh, but Moses, you are good enough. Moses, repeat after me. You can do it. That's not what he says to Moses. In the moment that Moses is discouraged, I'm not good enough, God doesn't give Moses a bigger vision of Moses. He gives Moses a bigger vision of God. And this is what we need in those moments of discouragement. We need to see God high and lifted up. Unfortunately, this is not the message that so much quote-unquote Christianity is preaching today. There's a false preacher that unfortunately some of you have his books on your shelf. I won't give his name, but he has a really big smile. Okay? There's a false preacher and he wrote a book titled The Power of I Am. And in this book, he draws out this whole argument about how this woman who, grew up just thinking she was ugly, and you know what she needed? She needed to tell herself, I am beautiful. And when you're feeling sick, you need to tell yourself, I am healthy, so that health will come to you. I am is God's name. It is not your name. It is a first person verb. I am. We cannot employ that because we are not. But our God is, and His promise is not to give us the power to be I am, but rather to be with us. And in the moment that you are discouraged, you need to stop focusing on your imperfections and focus on His perfection. God didn't argue with Moses and say, Moses, there's nothing wrong with your mouth. Moses in this moment did not have a speech problem. There was a heart problem. And the heart problem is that God was very small and Moses was very big. And that's what happens when we spend 40 years in the desert focusing on our own failures. We create this reality that our failures are the reality. And the fact is, even though our failures are true, even though those are real, they are not God's reality. He is above those. And He comes to Moses. And He says, Moses, focus on me. I'll take care of it. So if you're struggling with discouragement, if you're struggling in your walk of faith, you need a bigger view of God. And the third thing that we see, you need to keep obeying. Discouragement is never an excuse for disobedience. We can feel bad all we want. That doesn't give us an excuse to do what we want. Verse 13. Moses is out of excuses. Yeah, Moses has a speech problem now. His speech problem is he can't think of any good reasons. So he says, please send somebody else. I don't want to go. That's it. God's cut through all the facade that Moses is throwing up. And Moses gets right, I don't want to obey God. I just don't want to do it. That's the heart of the issue. Then the anger of Yahweh was kindled against Moses. You need to keep obeying. God finally gets angry. Do you see that? The anger of God was kindled against Moses. Now later on, when Moses says, Yahweh, reveal your name to me, God says, you can't see my glory and live, but I'll reveal a portion of it. And when he does that, later on in Exodus, he says, Yahweh, Yahweh, slow to anger and abounding in loving kindness. But here he gets angry. Now, we ought to, number one, be extremely glad that our God is a God who is slow to anger. Amen? Otherwise, the Bible would have been a very short book. It would have ended in Genesis 3. They ate from the tree, they burned with fire, the end. But our God is slow to anger, faithful, committed. He is a God of patience. But to be slow to anger, what does that also mean? It means he gets angry. And we ought to also be very glad of that, because the alternative would be that he is a God of indifference and he just doesn't care. And where would that leave us? So the fact that he is slow to anger is an encouragement on both sides, that he is patient, but that he does also get angry. And here he's angry with Moses because Moses is being an idiot. When I was in college, I did eventually become a fairly good basketball player. It was all those sprints and those shots that made me decent. Went to college and played basketball in varsity, and we had a coach. And now we're all very good friends. Whenever we come back to the States, that's like the signal that it's time for us to have a reunion. So the team gets back together, and if possible, our coach comes back. He's moved on to 2 other schools since then, but he'll come back, and we're all very good friends now. And so we all then get together and tell the stories. And there's one year, we had a pretty good team that year. And so our coach was always scheduling competition that was better than us, so that we would play competition that was better and we would then get better. So come the end of the season, when we have our end of year tournament, that, we'd perform at a high level. There was a guy that sat on the end of the bench. He didn't get much playing time. Poor guy. His name was Tim. Sat at the end of the bench 3 times that year. One time, coach comes into the locker room. He had a temper. His face, he was blonde, but his face would turn this bright red color. One time he comes in and he chucks a marker and it bounces off the wall and hits Tim in the head. Another time he comes in, he kicks a chair and it lands on Tim's lap. This time, he had a piece of chalk. And he comes in and he just doesn't say a word. Just starts drawing a basketball court, and then drawing one of the plays that we're supposed to run, and we hadn't run it very well. And we're losing, and he comes in, and he draws this play, and then he turns around and looks at us, and he goes, "We don't have a talent problem. We have an obedience problem." And he takes the chalk and he chucks it against the blackboard, and it shatters in half and hits Tim in the head. 3 times that year, Tim got like shrapnel from the coach. But that was the issue. He was right. We didn't have a talent problem. We were a good team, but we weren't executing rightly. We had an obedience problem. And this is Moses' problem right here. He doesn't have a speaking problem. He's got an obedience problem. I just don't want to do it. And the fact of the matter is, when God is calling us and we are resisting, that's what it boils down to. We will come up with all these excuses, but the fact of the matter is we just don't want to do it. We have an obedience problem. And discouragement will sometimes lead us to think that we have a right to indulge ourselves. And we don't. Discouragement is not an excuse to be disobedient. And God, in his anger, in his response to Moses, he gives Moses a concession. He says, "Fine, you don't want to talk? Your brother Aaron. He'll come in. He'll talk. He shall speak, verse 16, he shall speak to you for you to the people, and he shall be your mouth, and you shall be as God to him. God was offering Moses the position of prophet, priest, and king. And Moses wouldn't take it. Now Moses, we know from later in the story, couldn't have truly carried that weight himself anyway. But of course, if he had been submitted to God, he would have and could have. And so he's resistant, and God offers him a concession. And he will do this. God will do this. When we resist, again, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he does give his people free moral agency. And when we resist him, he says, fine, okay, we'll do it this way. And he comes and he institutes Aaron and his line as high priest. That's going to cause massive headaches for Moses. While Moses, when they come back, and he does lead the people back to this mountain, and they do worship Yahweh at this mountain just like Yahweh said they would, when Moses goes up to make the covenant, what do the people do? What does Aaron do? Aaron builds a golden calf. Right? This resistance creates a thorn, a future thorn in the side of Moses in his walk of faith. And that will happen when we resist God. He will get his way. He will get his way. But so often his way eventually then becomes a thorn in our own side because we wouldn't obey in the first place. And this happens in the relationship with Moses and Aaron. But this ought to be incredibly encouraging to us. God's interaction with Moses. Now we come to the end. We come to the end of this story. Verse 17, you shall take in your hand the staff, and with it you shall do these signs. The end. Happily ever after. Moses obeys. We can all go home, right? It leaves it. Did Moses obey? Did he obey? When does he obey? But the encouragement that we take away from this is that God is committed to his plan and his people. He will not leave his own. He will not discard his own. You need to have a deeper appreciation of just how faithful he is. Number 2, God is sufficient. We need a bigger view of God because God is sufficient. When he calls us, he equips us. And it says, 1 Thessalonians, write this down, 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 verse 24, faithful is he who has called you, who also will do it. He will perform through you what he has called you to do if you remain faithful. He is always faithful. So then we are posed with the same question as Moses. Will you trust God, his goodness, his revelation about himself? Will you trust it and obey, or will you set out to establish your own definition of good and evil? This is God's story of how he reveals himself. And we've mentioned that there is a greater Exodus. There is a greater Moses. And we're going to find mapped on to this book the rest of Scripture. God offers Moses the role of prophet, priest, and king. Moses couldn't do it. But there is somebody who could. Right? Somebody who perfectly fulfills the role of prophet, priest, and king. And that one came. Moses' brother, the high priesthood, the one to intercede between Moses and God and the people failed miserably. Not just at the calf incident, but there's a lot of failures. In fact, God executes 2 of Aaron's sons for their failures. But we have an elder brother who came, who is the true and better high priest, isn't he? And he tells Moses, take the staff. Moses, this small piece of a tree with which you shall do the signs. And he gives Moses a small piece of a tree through which this small piece of a tree, and mind you, remember, what do trees represent? The relationship between heaven and earth. In Scripture, when they're used symbolically, they're used to represent the relationship between heaven and earth. And what we find in this staff, a small piece of a tree through which God will accomplish an incredible deliverance, punching evil in the face, opening the Red Sea, parting the waters, bringing manna from heaven, all these things that God does with a small piece of a tree to accomplish the salvation of his people become representative of another small piece of a tree that one day accomplish perfect salvation. He gives it to Moses. He says, Moses, take this, and you're going to save my people. And we ourselves are called to do what? To take up our cross and follow. Now the thing is, when you pick up that cross, it's hard to hold on to anything else. Moses wants to hold on to his failures because sometimes we're more comfortable with the miserable reality that our failures have created in our own mind than the glorious reality of the presence of God with us. And now that Moses has gone through this, surely now he obeys. Surely, right? Next week, Lord willing, we're going to be in Exodus chapter 4, verse 18 to 31. We're going to read the rest of this story. You can read it in preparation. When exactly does Moses obey? Because I'll tell you, this next section is one of the weirdest stories in the whole Bible. What do we do with it? Well, next week, Lord willing, we'll be looking at that. Let's pray. Our Father God, you desire to accomplish a plan to your glory that all creation was created for. And you call us to partner with you in this plan, and you remind us that you are committed to us. So, Father, I pray that you, through your Spirit, would challenge us, would bring us to our knees in worship, that we would have a deep appreciation for your faithfulness, a big view of you, Father, and cause us to persevere in obedience even when that obedience is hard. That we would trust you, that we would obey you, that we would follow you in all things, regardless of the cost. Father, I pray this in Christ's name. Amen.